On today's show, you're going to wonder why anybody at management at Boeing Company even has a job at this hour. What is going on, investors? Hopefully, you guys are doing well out there. It is time to talk about Boeing Company and talk about the victims of the mismanagement by this company over the last several years that has led to year-to-date stock declines of over 25% in the stock over the last year, down to 36%, and over the last 5 years, down 15%, which is essentially criminal if you looked at the performance of the S&P 500, let alone stocks like Tesla and Apple and Amazon. Down 15% over the last 5 years is an absolute disgrace. And if you didn't think it could get any worse, well, it absolutely did. With the Boeing Company, after reporting their earnings before the bell today, the stock is down over another 7.5%. Speaking of those earnings, they came in at $14 billion. That was the decline year over year of 8%. So you not only have declining revenues, but you also missed expectations by, just $1.9 billion. How is that even possible? You also missed on that earnings per share side, expected to lose $2.50 per share. Instead, they lost $2.75 per share. We'll talk about what is causing these big misses over at the company. We'll talk about continuing delays in their products. We'll talk about how the CEO is taking absolutely no accountability. And at best, the CEO of Boeing should be fired. And quite frankly, many believe he should be in jail at this hour, let alone collecting rich stock-based compensation, which we'll talk about here more in a moment. We'll talk about the earnings estimates, which have to come in. I'm looking at these earnings estimates, and I don't believe any single one of these. We'll see how they come in the next couple of days or weeks ahead with Boeing. We'll get over to the company, and we'll see that this company essentially has negative gross margins, let alone negative EBITDA and net income. And then we'll come over to the stock chart, and when it's that negative, you'd expect this stock to be in a downward channel, and not only in a downward channel, but we actually broke through the bottom of it, which is just one of the you're already in a bearish formation, and then you pile on and make it worse. Now, what's shocking at this hour, other than the CEO of Boeing still has a job and is drawing a salary, is the fact that the short interest in this stock is non-existent. They don't pay a dividend, so that's not keeping the shorts away. I don't necessarily understand it. Maybe they're playing the short in the kind of the option market with this stock. Maybe the stock has just been beaten up so badly that the shorts just don't see an opportunity here. Maybe there's some areas where maybe some opportunities where this thing could gap up. Certainly when you look at this from a traditional valuation metric or price to sales, you can't really look at earnings anymore because Boeing's earnings have shriveled up over the last couple of years. But you got a $104 billion market cap on Boeing, and you've got $317 billion worth of backlog business. That includes nearly 4,200 commercial airplanes awaiting to be delivered in a hot airline market. This company, if they weren't falling over themselves trying to make their products the safest and the best in the world, quite frankly, this stock would probably be double the price it is. But unfortunately, because of mismanagement, this stock continues to head lower. Now, Boeing said that it will pause production of its 77X plane through 2023, citing certification delays by U.S. regulators and weak demand, and does not expect deliveries to start until 2025, more than a year later than it previously forecast. This is obviously a plane that was scheduled to go live far before 2025, so this is just the latest in pushbacks, and the company disclosed $1.5 billion in abnormal costs related to a program that is not set to get off the ground for another 3 years before they start delivering those planes to customers. In a separate address to investors, the CEO of the company said, and I quote, "I don't attribute our certification issues and timelines to engineering shortfalls in any way," according to CEO David Calhoun of Boeing. Well, I tell you what, Mr. Calhoun, if you don't attribute the issues that you've had your planes take the lives of innocent people around the world, if you don't blame that on engineering shortfalls, then the only person left to blame is you personally, Mr. Calhoun. You should be fired, and you should be feeling lucky at this hour that you're not in jail for causing the death of hundreds of people out there. If what's gone on over at Boeing doesn't make you upset as a shareholder, doesn't make you upset as a business person, doesn't make you upset as an investor, just go buy the ARK fund, go buy a couple of ETFs, and turn off CNBC and go play golf every day. What's going on over at Boeing is an absolute disaster. In the most recent quarter, they also revealed that cost overruns of Air Force One, the presidential jet that was commissioned by the former President Trump went way over budget, and they had to recognize over $1.3 billion in charges. And Calhoun said that Boeing has abandoned its strategy of undercutting competitors in order to gain key defense franchises and contracts with the United States government. It's probably the only project that is finished under budget in the last 30 years of the United States government. Again, thanks to Boeing. Everybody else gets the bag when they deal with the United States government. Boeing, it cost them $1.3 billion in charges in the most recent quarter. Again, showing you another reason why this company is an absolute complete disaster. Now, in the most recent quarter, we talked about how they had $13.9 billion worth of revenue. That was a decline of 8% year over year. They missed expectations by nearly $2 billion. Okay, $2 billion off $14 billion. You can do the math. Is actually a pretty large percentage miss on that revenue side. So I don't believe any of these growth and revenue targets that Wall Street has set out for Boeing in the coming quarters. $19.2 billion in quarter two. Yeah, right. $21 billion in Q3, which would recognize 40% year over year growth. Yeah, right. Q4, $22 billion or 50% growth year over year. Yeah, right. Over at Boeing. Are they actually going to earn per share 50 cents next quarter, $1.25, $1.64? Yeah, right. When you get into these financials, this company is miles away from being profitable. And now you're starting to delay key projects, which you have a backlog of business waiting to be delivered in one of the hottest commercial airline traffic demand surges that we've seen in our lifetime. And Boeing is dropping the ball across the board. You see here, sales of products came in at $11.4 billion. On a quarterly basis, you're at 12.5 from a year ago period. Now it gets worse than that. Off of $11.4 billion worth of sales of products, well, guess what? It cost you $11.4 billion. So you didn't make money on those sales. On the service side, you had $2.5 billion worth of revenue, and you made just a little bit of money on there because that cost you $2.2 billion. You're used to high margin tech stocks. Well, this ain't one of them, okay? Because off $13.9 billion worth of revenue, we had cost of sales. Okay, this isn't before we get to general administrative costs. This isn't before we get to research and development fees, and then also paying all the attorneys that are defending Boeing in court cases where their products have taken the lives of people. Okay, we have total costs and expenses at $13.6 billion. Revenues were just 13.9. Now you minus off $863 million of general and administrative expenses and another $633 million worth of R&D expenses, and you get a loss from operations in the most recent quarter at $1.1 billion. They were at an $83 million loss in the previous period, essentially running at break even. People thought, including myself, that maybe things would start turn the corner over at Boeing. They could get the issues with their planes and the engineering and getting all the certifications out of the way, and they can start delivering these Dreamliners to customers. Well, that's not going to happen for many more years. This company is going to be bleeding money quarter over quarter for the foreseeable future. From a cash basis, they've got about $11 billion. At the beginning of the year, they had closer to $16 billion. So you got from $16 billion down to this is closer to $12 billion. That is not good. They have plenty of debt on that liability side. Some of it looks like it rolled over to the short-term side. From a cash flow perspective, you might be saying, well, maybe there's some saving grace when it comes to cash flows. No, actually, it gets worse. For 3 months ended, we had $1.2 billion net loss. Last year on a quarterly basis, we had a $561 million loss. So we've more than doubled our net losses year over year on a quarterly basis. When you factor in all the depreciation and stock-based compensation that you get to add back into a company, how is it that management took $203 million, not in a year, not in a decade, not over their lifetime? No, in 3 months, management, which has scoffed this company's ability to deliver a product and cost innocent people their lives, no, they gave themselves $203 million worth of stock-based compensation in the most recent quarter. Now, forgive me for the criticism, considering it's actually down year over year from 321 down to 203. In my opinion, these people should be reaching into their wallets and paying us, and maybe paying restitution to some of these families. We get to add back in things like that. That's really generous. I think you come down here to net cash used in operating activities. Boeing burned through $3.2 billion in the most recent quarter. So our net loss accelerated and our cash burn is still in that $3 billion range. That's why when you come up here to a cash on the balance sheet, it is starting to dwindle down. The saving grace in the quarter, they recognize a $5 billion proceeds from investments, and that helped this company not burn through even more cash than it normally would have. A couple more quarters like this from Boeing, and they're looking to do an equity raise. They're looking to do some kind of fundraising because they are burning through cash relatively quickly over at this company. And obviously, a lot of this bad news has obviously reflected in Boeing's technical chart. Over the last couple of months, man, this stock was in an uptrend. A lot of people, including me, we started looking at the financials, looking at the different valuation metrics, and we started to say, hey, if a management could actually execute over at Boeing, maybe the worst is behind us. And I think we actually thought that out loud here on the channel. Well, apparently not. And from a technical perspective, this stock has gotten in kind of the dreaded downward channel. And not only are we in a downward channel, but we actually pierced through the bottom of it today. That's an incredibly bearish move when you're already in this downward channel and then you put up a red candle outside the bottom trend line. That's incredibly bearish. Now, on the bright side, yeah, sure. Do you have support for this stock? Sure. It's all the way down here at $100 per share. Do you got some support underneath that? Maybe, but there's not a lot. When stocks set up in this technical pattern, the only thing you can possibly do in them is actually trade the rebound back up to the top. I would not consider this a value stock. I would not consider this a stock I'm looking to add into some kind of value portfolio as a buy and hold investment, hoping that 3 or 4 years down the road, Boeing gets their act together. I showed you at the top, over the last 5 years, people have been hoping Boeing would get its act together, and it's down 15%, meaning even with inflation, your money under your mattress has almost performed as well as Boeing stock over the last 5 years. Boeing, to me, in the short and intermediate term, if you want to get into this stock for any different reasons, maybe it's oversold. Maybe there's some news that could bump it. Maybe from a technical pattern, it hits support and it rebounds and it rallies. This would be a take profit stock, a trade, a shorter term investment. Certainly there's some value here with $371 billion worth of backlog business and just $104 billion market cap. Yes, this stock will bounce. It will rebound. People will make arguments to buy it. But at some point, these earnings estimates are going to have to come way in, both on the earnings side and the revenue side, and eventually management needs to be held accountable over at this company, because despite all the delays, despite the tragedy around this company's mismanagement of their products, the CEO says they don't attribute their certification issues and timelines to engineering shortfalls in any way. And again, Mr. Calhoun, then who is to blame? Maybe you are, and maybe you should step down because you have absolutely decimated shareholder returns, let alone the lives of innocent people across the world, with your ineptness and inability to run the Boeing company. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. Not a glowing endorsement at all, but again, stocks like this do exist. I would take profits on any kind of rally in this stock, and I would go and run and put your money into companies that have far better management and brighter prospects ahead than Boeing.